Good morning, everyone. This is Noah Flaherty, and I'm joined by my colleague, Michael Flesch. Thank you so much for joining us on this, for us, it's a bright and sunny morning here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're going to talk about Onshape and CAD systems in general, and what value they bring to businesses. I think we're all pretty familiar with what functionality CAD has and what it does for your business, but what we're going to talk about today is the costs associated with CAD. One thing that we'll see is that a lot of people, when they're considering purchasing a new CAD system, transitioning to a new CAD system, or switching over completely, they look at costs like how much the software itself will cost the business, how much hardware is going to cost, the computers or workstations to run that. But it's not as common for people to think about the indirect costs associated with CAD. And we're going to dive into that a bit today and hopefully benchmark where Onshape stands and how it compares to some of the other CAD systems out there. So with that, I'm going to dive right in. But once again, just want to thank everyone for their time here this morning. Thanks for being prompt. And let's get going. So Mike.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Noah. Just a little background on me. I'm a longtime CAD person, been a longtime SolidWorks user, SolidWorks reseller for 15 years in the New England region. And before and after kind of leaving that SolidWorks reseller, I worked in the real world as a CAD user before, and then afterward as a CAD administrator, managing a 60-site setup, with hundreds of engineers using PDM systems all over the world. So yeah, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about how my experience was, and then of course, the experiences that our Onshape users have actually talked to us about as well. So today we're going to break this up, as Noah mentioned, into the tangible expenses and some of the indirect costs of a CAD system. So first, let's just kind of set the stage, though, and talk about why Onshape took it upon ourselves to actually build something new, to kind of solve some of the problems that were out there. And really, we built Onshape to solve the everyday problems that engineers work on. So we really want engineers to focus on the work that they're building, the products that they're designing, and not being a pseudo CAD administrator, right? IT person. They can focus on their best work, right? So instead of focusing on things called, that we've kind of summed up is a term called design gridlock, right? And think about, you can get your job done with your current CAD system, right? You can get from point A to point B, but you might have to take a few, turns, some shortcuts, back roads to kind of get around to the final destination, right? So, some of the symptoms of being in design gridlock, I know it kind of sounds like a pharmaceutical commercial now, but some of the symptoms of design gridlock, you can probably nod your head and agree with some of these things. You might not have all of these symptoms. I certainly hope not. I know I've had these at different points in time in my career as both a SolidWorks reseller technical support person as well as a CAD administrator, managing hundreds of engineers. If you saw a picture of me, I've kind of lost a lot of my hair, and a lot of it was due to some of these issues. But people, a lot of these issues, like crashing, right? You might have a really awesome CAD workstation that crashes very few times, but I bet you still have a couple of these other issues, like forgetting to save, forgetting to back up. You probably, have a PDM system. If you do, you have a problem of what happens if somebody doesn't check in their file and they go away on vacation. All these things are just what are considered to be design gridlock.
And totally. And what we see is that a lot of our customers coming from old CAD systems, this was kind of like an accepted part of their day-to-day. It was just part of the job, it was part of using the CAD system, and it was kind of, there's just no way around it. It's just part of the day-to-day. And I think our claim here today, and what we'll see in hard numbers, is that the time that goes into making up for this gridlock costs the business money. And it's very hard to put numbers to what that value is and what the value is that you're losing. But we believe that we've taken a big step forward in that direction by creating this ROI calculator to put hard numbers to gridlock. So we're going to continue to set the stage here, but the end goal will be to run through a couple of scenarios, real world scenarios, that companies that we encounter every day face, input the values into this calculator and see what type of return on investment their current CAD system is giving them as opposed to something like Onshape.
So, the design gridlock problem, impacts both the everyday engineer, but also at the higher level business level, right? So if you're thinking about an engineer and kind of waiting for a file to be checked out from a replicated PDM server, or confusion if you have the latest version or not, or an error message that pops up, even error messages on error messages, I've seen them all, it's crazy, these kind of confusing things that happen. And then, the hassles of having to send files back and forth and making sure they're the right format, right version. These things are things that engineers deal with, but the things that the engineers deal with will end up rolling up to the business level, right? Which cause delays, increased cost, you might miss deadlines, and then stagnation because you're not trying out new, interesting design ideas. Instead, you're working on trying to fix the problems of the current CAD environment. So really, that's really what design gridlock's all about, and it ends up being the biggest problem that an engineering-centric company has, if you really get down the brass tacks, right? And that's our premise here with Onshape. So let's just jump into some of the tangible expenses are well known that everyday CAD users know about. And maybe you don't know about. I'm not sure. Not everybody has access to the, you don't get the quote in the purchase order, as far as, what you're paying for. So maybe this might be enlightening.
And what I would encourage is, as we listen and talk through these things, I would encourage you to reflect on, like, how is this affecting your business, and what could your business do with some of the saved money or some of the saved value, or especially with the indirect costs, if time was freed up by not having to deal with downtime or lack of efficiency, where could that engineering time be spent elsewhere?
Excellent. Yeah, that's perfect. And by the way, if you have questions during the webcast, make sure to use the questions panel that you see, in here, and we'll definitely have a live Q&A session toward the end of it. So that questions panel is in the GoToMeeting software. So let's just get right into it. I can find my mouse here again. So let's talk about the well-known kind of tangible expenses. And I'm picking on just what I know, right? I mean, I know about the pricing of all the other CAD systems out there, of course, being around for a while, but I'm just choosing SolidWorks because this is one that we encounter, a good majority of the time. So if you think about a system like SolidWorks, and if you're implementing it or using it today, you've either purchased SolidWorks Standard, Professional, or Premium, right, at this day and age. And the pricing of that software, you buy a seat of that software, right? It's $4,000 for the SolidWorks Standard, and it's $8,000 for SolidWorks Premium. So you buy that up front, typically. They have some other programs now that they're starting to try to roll out for different pricing models, but all in all, most 99% of people buy the seat of software. And then on top of that, you buy the subscription service package, which gives you access to your local SolidWorks value-added reseller to get technical support, as well as the updates, bug fixes over the year, hot fixes, service packs, all that stuff, comes with that subscription. So when you buy a seat of SolidWorks, year one, you're buying the seat of software for whatever version you want. Let's say it's SolidWorks Professional, which is $5,500. Then you buy the subscription for that, which is $1,500. So now you're adding that up on year one. And then if you're new to SolidWorks, they'll recommend that you'll buy classroom training where you'll travel to your SolidWorks reseller's local office. You'll sit in a classroom with a bunch of other people, and you'll pay about $1,500, $2,000 per student, for a 4-day class, 8 hours a day. You get pizza, lunch, it's good. It's good. I've taught these classes. But there's also implementation consulting as well to help you set up your environment. If you're dealing with a larger CAD deployment, they'll usually recommend that to help set up licensed servers and, various other things, to help you get started. And those end up being around $2,000 a day. So those are some of the well-known tangible, expenses. You really can't argue with that. And in fact, this is probably on the lower end. If you're like on CATIA or other systems, the cost is way higher, right? Then you get into the hardware, right? So I love having a good computer. Personally, at home, I actually have a really awesome, nice gaming computer. Got the best NVIDIA GeForce card available on the market. It was like an $800 graphics card for gaming. You might be laughing at me thinking, oh, well, I got one that's way better, right? But I like having a good computer. But at Onshape, if you were to walk in our office here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and walk around, you'd find that almost everybody's running a MacBook computer, a MacBook Pro, 2013 MacBook Pro. I think we bought about 100 of them when we first started, and we're all still using them. And these computers are really good computers, but they're not CAD workstations. You can get away with a lot more with Onshape. So when I talk about workstations here for running a CAD system, I know you can get away with running SolidWorks on substandard hardware, but it's not a pleasant experience. You'll end up encountering more issues than it's probably worth, and then you'll end up upgrading to a higher end workstation. So if we actually go to here's a link right here. Thanks, Noah. So I was looking around. I remembered this article from a little while ago on the SolidWorks website about how to configure your SolidWorks 2018 CAD workstation, and it was a kind of a guest post from Box, who makes really good CAD workstations. They're excellent computers. I've actually used them over the years, and I highly recommend it. Now, if you start with this, right, if you look at this, they're going to talk about how SolidWorks kind of operates a little bit under the hood. How big are your assemblies? Talking about what you need for a good CAD workstation. And it's all about the need for speed. Back to that Top Gun quote, right? So if you think about what you need for a computer, they're walking you through this in this blog article. I'd encourage you to read it. Just do a kind of a Google search for how to configure your SolidWorks 2008 workstation, or 2018 workstation. Now, they're talking about things like adding, huge amounts of memory, overclocking your system, talking about the graphics card, the NVIDIA Quadro series, great graphics card, but as you know, a little bit pricey. Solid state hard drives, they're showing a little cross section of the model here in SolidWorks. And it's a great article, and it gives you a great amount of information. But let me go in back to this. This is actually his website right here. Thank you. So if you go to their website, they're going to help you kind of spec a new CAD workstation out, right? So how do you want to configure it? Now, of course, and I'm bad with the touchpad here, so my apologies. So if we go, you can see the different types of things, mobile workstations, and if you scroll up just a little bit here, there's going to be, the mobile workstation, and you probably want extremely high-end workstations if you're doing simulation and rendering, but I'm not even going to pick on that. I'm going to pick on just a regular design and modeling system, what they recommend. Now, of course, they want you to buy a good computer, right? They're in business to sell awesome computers, and if you care about your CAD workstation, you're probably going to a company like this and not going to Best Buy. Nothing against Best Buy, I go there once a week, but you're going to buy a CAD workstation from a specialist. And you can see here that they're not cheap, right? Even for the most basic configuration, Core i7, overclocked, liquid cooled, 8 gigs of RAM to start, and you're going to want more than 8 gigs of RAM, guarantee you that. You go in and customize that and upgrade this to something way better, right? So that's really what you want to think about in a CAD workstation, right? So if you're going to go down this road, be prepared, right, to spend a little bit of money there. So, and the reason why we bring this up is it all ties back to the architecture of the system itself, right? When you're dealing with an old CAD system, you're dealing with something that needs to be downloaded, installed, and is 100% dependent on the hardware that you're running. When you are making use of like a secure cloud workspace like Onshape does, you're able to offload that heavy-duty lifting onto supercomputers up on the cloud. So that's where Onshape really shines, and some of these modern CAD systems shine, where you don't need to go, like, yeah, you might take pride in having a heavy-duty workstation, but the fact of the matter is that that is not necessary for the business, and it's costing the business money, especially when you consider the fact that this hardware needs to be replaced every couple of years. And this kind of decay of use of the hardware is something that this calculator will take into account. Perfect. Yeah, that's well said. So a lot of engineers I know, they'll have their CAD workstation. Sometimes they'll also have a laptop. It'll have one of each or both, depending on, if they travel a lot or not. Then we also have to think about servers, right? So, when we start talking about the next slide, which talks about data management and PDM, this comes into account a little bit more. But if you're using a PDM system, you're going to install and spin up servers. A lot of people do virtual environment type servers, of course, and we know that at this day and age. But if you want to have the hardware to back up those virtual servers, and you really want to throw a lot of resources at it. You need the SQL database server, you need archive servers for each site, and I'll get into that in the next slide, and also networking equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So when we talk about that, we're thinking about the data management aspect of things. So let's look at this kind of sample company here. We have a company that's headquartered in California, and that's where their headquarters are. They have a database server, they have an archive server, and this is the way the PDM products that SolidWorks operate, where you install these services on your own equipment, right? You're not, it's not being hosted by anybody else except you, right? That's the way it's set up. And you'd spin up those servers, whether they be virtual or not. Of course, the virtual servers require, advanced hardware and maintenance and care and feeding. But then you have other sites. Maybe you have a site in Boston. Maybe you have a site in Scotland. Maybe one down in Rio, some down in India, Chinese manufacturing operation. And you need to spin up archive servers at each of those sites as well. And each of those sites need care and maintenance on their own. Maybe it's an IT person. Maybe it's an engineer who who has a part-time job as being the CAD administrator. I actually heard somebody call it a CADmin recently. I really like that term, being the CADmin. Put that on a business card. So anyway, you have all these sites that you need to maintain the hardware at and the CAD system at, and we'll talk about that in the intangible section later on as well. But just think of the software costs, the well-known software costs for running a PDM system. So I'm going to choose SolidWorks PDM Professional as the CAD system that we're just kind of comparing to, but you could replace this with any other kind of PDM system that's out there, whether it be third party or if
Team Centers or
Windmill. Exactly. So SolidWorks has this thing called the editor, the CAD editor, which is available for every CAD seat that you would buy. So you'd buy one for one. However many CAD seats you have, you buy the PDM CAD editor. Now they have a light version of the PDM tool that comes with some of the versions of SolidWorks, depending on what you buy, but if you want to do anything with more than one site, you're required to go to this higher end PDM system because of the replication and the way it handles the data structure. So you have the CAD editor you buy, almost $2,000. Then if you want people to contribute, like to participate in a workflow that are not CAD users, that's essentially where you buy a contributor, series of licenses. And then you can buy viewer packs, which are sold in 5 or 10 packs. I actually can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's 5 or 10 pack, and it's $3,000 depending on if it's 5 or 10 pack. And I think we got this right in the calculation.
We definitely did.
Okay. So, then we talked about subscription services on top of that, right? So all of these add-ons have the subscription as well. I didn't put the pricing in here, but it is in the CAD calculator in the what Noah's going to show you later. But there's a subscription price that is, approximately 25–30% of the cost of each one of these that you pay on top of this. And you pay that year 1 and year 2 and 3 for the subscription.
And I think it's a good point here to kind of like step back and talk about this for a second. Even if you're not a company who has archive servers all over the world, or even if you just want to manage the workflow between people in the same office, like you want to prevent people from overwriting each other's work, or you want a better version management, this PDM becomes necessary pretty quickly. And there are a lot of product development companies out there who are using Google Drive or Dropbox to manage their files, or maybe they have their own file server in-house, and they're starting to hit that point where they're running into gridlock of overwriting each other's work, and they're starting to face this need potentially for a PDM system, and they're looking for bills or looking at quotes on their desk that are exorbitant costs like what you see here. So this isn't just the big global companies, this comes down to the small companies too. And if you're a small company that's not running into this now, chances are you will someday as your amount of data grows or as you bring on additional people.
Yeah.
And it's just like crazy to me that people are implementing their own servers and IT infrastructure in this day and age when the cost of cloud computing and cloud storage has just dropped so much, and there's services out there that will take on all that burden for you, essentially.
Yeah. What is Amazon AWS? They make $17 billion a year. That's their revenue on the AWS side.
Right.
Everybody's doing it.
And
right?
it's worth pointing out too that CAD is one of the only industries in software today that hasn't taken this transition and hasn't taken advantage of that, with the exception of Onshape. If you look at finance and QuickBooks, or if you look at sales and Salesforce, right, or marketing and HubSpot, it's all following this paradigm, and CAD's kind of lagging behind.
Yeah. So
let's dive into the indirect costs a little bit, because this is the one that most people don't think about, frankly, and it's one that people don't put a number to, but as we'll see, this actually accounts for most of the cost burden, more so than the cost of the software or hardware combined. And we're talking about the downtime due to design gridlock. We're talking about how much time it might take to adopt a new CAD system. So we understand that if you were to switch to Onshape, your engineers will be learning for a little bit, and we take that into account. We recognize that, acknowledge that, and we want to play a fair game here. And then there's the opportunity costs of not moving to a more efficient system. And then there, as we'll see, there's actually a list of other things that we haven't included in our calculator for simplicity's sake, but that you're likely facing the costs of as well. So really the hardware and software, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The first is the cost of design gridlock. And when we talk about crashes, every time Mike and I show the slide to a customer, they're like, yep, seen that before. I mean, I also come from a mechanical engineering background. I have had my fair share of crashes and lost work and redoing work. And the fact of the matter is that time adds up. Every time SOLIDWORKS crashes on you, or any other old CAD system crashes on you, that's time spent rebooting, that's time spent redoing that lost work, and it's time that could be saved doing productive activity as well. And that adds up a lot over time, and it ends up costing your business a good chunk of change. And that crashing, that goes back to the whole architecture question, right? When you're running an old CAD system that takes a lot of horsepower on a local computer, if any one thing happens, that local computer's down and you have to reboot it. One benefit of the cloud is, even if that rare crash does happen up on the cloud, we can do things like bump you over to the next server without you even knowing it, and you're up and running, and it doesn't even look like a crash to you. So in fact, we have a blog post coming out about how we do that under the hood pretty soon, and I'd encourage you to keep your eye out for it.
And it's not really the fault of SOLIDWORKS and the other kind of installed CAD vendors, right? I mean, they make really good software. I've used it over the years. I owe a lot of my credit and existence to, being part of that revolution as the installed CAD on the Windows platform worked. But that Windows platform and having to have the CAD workstation, installing, just think of all the combinations that are there. You have the operating system, I'm using Windows 7. I have the graphics card, NVIDIA Quadro XYZ. I have the driver that SOLIDWORKS has tested and approved to work with that. I have antivirus software. I have other networking things and things that the engineer doesn't really have that much control over. So that really, half or 3/4 of the problems are probably related just to that architecture and platform.
A lot of variables that they have to account for.
It's impossible to account for all those variables. So that's just one thing that.
And when we run Onshape up on the cloud, it's being run on self-contained closed boxes where there's literally no other software running. So we've minimized every variable that could possibly be at play, and Onshape's running in this pristine environment essentially, and that's why those crashes are so rare.
Yeah.
And then so that's kind of like insider info, but basically there's also this notion of IT overhead, right? Like, we talk to customers all the time that move from an old CAD system, and they might spend weeks upgrading all their hardware, and during the hour or two or whatever it is that hardware is performing the update, the engineers can't be doing CAD. Similarly, throughout the year, there might be updates, service packs. You might have to spend time locating files or getting the sync back up and running, or making sure that the archive servers has the most up-to-date data. And there's just a bunch of IT overhead that, frankly, is not fun for most people, and is just time that could be spent doing productive activity like designing the next great product.
Absolutely.
Now, like I said, we want to play a fair game, and we know that when you either choose Onshape or switch to Onshape or transition to Onshape, that it will take some time to ramp up. So we've taken into account how many hours it might take to get trained. We've taken into account some number of weeks that it might take you to get fully comfortable. And we've taken into account the fact that some of your engineering time, at least at the beginning, is going to have to be spent setting up drawing templates or bringing in old CAD files or any of that sort of thing. But then we've also factored in the opportunity costs of not switching to Onshape. So we put a variable in there where you can assume that Onshape will make you some amount or some percentage more efficient in the long term on your day-to-day CAD activity, and we'll see how that pays off in the end as well. What this calculator does not account for is a number of things just for simplicity, but that you're likely paying for too. So whatever savings we come up with, chances are it's a little bit higher. So questions like, are you employing IT people or CAD admins just to keep the software running? Do you have to pay your VAR year over year for services or training? Are you sending the wrong versions of parts accidentally to manufacturers and having the wrong part being produced? I mean, that's a very costly mistake that goes away when you're all looking at the most up-to-date data in Onshape. And then lastly, are you paying subscriptions and then not even making use of it, right? So
that's the one that burns me the most.
Yeah.
I mean, not every, the bigger the company, right? Every 2 or 3 years, you might do the actual upgrade going from SOLIDWORKS 2015 to SOLIDWORKS 2018. And all those years in between, you're still paying your subscription in most cases because you want to stay active, you want tech support, all those things that the subscription's good for, but you're not reaping the benefit of having the latest and greatest software at all times. And there's business reasons why people do that, because it's connecting with other business systems in the company, so on and so forth. But that's the one that really grinds me.
Totally. Okay, so enough said. I think we've laid enough of a foundation here. But what I would love for you guys to do as you listen to this and hear this is share your feedback with us, right? So we prototyped this as a Google Sheet, and I fully intend on providing you all with the only link of this Google Sheet, at which point after the webinar you can make a copy of it, enter in your own scenario, and see what the savings of Onshape looks like to you. But yes, please use that question tool not only to ask questions, but to provide feedback or to gut check what we're assuming, right? So if you don't buy the fact that blah, 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 let us know. Cool, so let's dive in. So this is the prototyped Google Sheet ROI calculator, and it has some steps here. So I'll walk through just the functionality of it, but then we'll also, but as I do that, we'll run through a couple of scenarios. So yeah, in this first scenario,
Mike, do you want to upgrade here? So scenario one, let's say we have SolidWorks already. We're a small medical device company, maybe three engineers on SolidWorks. I'm kind of thinking of one in my head that's kind of local down the road that makes a really cool medical device. They have 3 seats of SolidWorks Professional. They want to add another engineer as they're growing. Right now, they're using a file server locally in their IT closet, and they've been considering PDM because they realize the benefits of having a nice audit trail of everything happening in a medical device kind of environment, right? So really, they have 3 seats of SolidWorks now, looking for one more. They don't have any PDM now. So let's try to figure out what that one looks like.
So you said they have 3 seats. They're looking to bring on maybe one more seat for a new hire that's coming up soon.
Yeah.
They don't have PDM. They don't need any viewers at this moment, and we want to look at their savings over 5 years.
Right. So
there's a lot going on here, and I plan on fully diving in here. But just right away, if you buy our assumptions, which I know you probably don't yet, over that first year, just due to upfront costs, both tangible and indirect in total, you're saving about 34K, and then over a 5-year time span, it's looking at like 120K. And I'm talking business value, right? So that's the sum of tangible and indirect costs. And we'll see what that savings breakdown looks like and what assumptions we made to get there. So tangible expenses, we factor in the CAD software costs. So there's the upfront fee per seat. As Mike said, for SolidWorks Professional, this is what we're looking at, as well as the annual cost of it. So for Onshape, for 3 seats of Onshape,
so for 3 seats of Onshape Professional, it's I think we actually changed that number because we were trying to do an every other year thing. That's why it's 4,200.
Oh, that's right. Thank you for spotting that.
Yeah.
There we go. So per seat, you're looking at 2,100, and per annual seat of SolidWorks, you're looking at about 1,500. So just in the CAD software itself, you can see the first year costs and then year after X cost. It's worth noting that when you get access to this CAD calculator, you can just negate any section. So if you switch this, if you just don't buy this whole section, or you don't or you want to see what the savings look like if you ignore it, you can just switch this to no, and the graphs update as well. Hardware costs. So we have the average cost of a computer. Mike and I, we estimate that the average cost of a computer needed to run Onshape is about $2,200, whereas for a CAD workstation, we're conservatively saying $3,000, but it's likely costing you more. And we're guessing those computers are going to last for about 3 years. Moving on to PDM, we break this down in a number of ways. We say that there's an upfront cost of the PDM software, or for just the server and storage. There's an annual cost to maintain that server and storage for the PDM system. Then there's the PDM software itself for the seats, annual costs for it. And then these aren't being used because we said 0 viewers, but if we were to add viewers, it would be $600 average upfront cost, and then $200 annually. So I want to show, just before we go too far, that these assumptions can be overridden in this tab. So we break down all the variables. You can see everything that we are assuming, and you can enter in a value to the right here in the assumption override and see what it looks like. So for example, if your VAR is giving you a great deal on SOLIDWORKS Professional, the upfront cost might be $4,000, and the average annual cost might be $1,000, and you can see how the savings changes.
They never discount.
Yeah, that's right.
But they do discount as a software. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I definitely encourage you to challenge our assumptions, put in your own scenarios, and see how it works out. But we're going to go with, at least for the sake of this webinar, what Mike and I have found through our digging and research. Moving on to indirect costs. These are things that, like I was saying, it's hard for people to put a number to usually. So we're hoping to bring to light how much this is actually costing your business. And again, when you get access to the sheet, if you don't buy any given section, just turn it off. So Mike and I were talking, and we talked to a lot of customers and people that are looking at Onshape. And on average, they're saying that their software is crashing about 5 times per week per engineer. It might take them 5 minutes or so to reboot their computer or their software, or reopen the whole assembly once it has crashed. This is, I think, conservative too, but it might be 20 minutes of rework, so you're spending 20 minutes doing unproductive activity. And then there's other things like downtime due to upgrades and updates. So we're saying that you're updating your CAD software every 1 year, might be less frequently for you. It takes about 60 minutes or an hour to perform that update, so you can't be doing CAD work while that update's happening. And then for all the other things, all the other kind of IT-related tasks that we were discussing in this slide up here, we're assuming that that accounts for maybe 30 minutes of engineering time per week. And this is where it adds up very quick, and it's something that, again, most people coming to Onshape have accepted this as a daily part of their grind. It's just part of using the CAD software. It's second nature. But that downtime and those design gridlock costs are costing your business hard cash. And we compute that by looking at things like the average salary of an engineer. We subtract the number of vacation days out of the working days in a year. We assume that they're working 40 hours per week. And we assume that 30% of their working hours are spent working on CAD. So again, you can override any of these assumptions, but given these assumptions and given these variables, we're finding that companies are losing that much value due to design gridlock. Next in our savings breakdown, again, we want to play a fair game here. So if you were to switch to Onshape, we recognize that it'll take some time to get fully up to speed. We assume that, and this is actually not per engineer, this is total, but we're saying, actually the assumptions might make it easier to see. So Onshape, we assume it'll take you about 12 hours to go through our training. We have an 8-hour boot camp that's all virtual. You don't have to send your engineers anywhere or have them spend full days. It's just 8 hours, 2 hours each day spread across 4 days. And then we put in a couple extra hours for things like before or after if you want to take some supplementary courses. We also assume that it'll take you about 6 weeks to be fully comfortable in Onshape. I think that's very conservative. Most of our customers are getting up to speed much faster. And we assume that you're going to be about 10% less efficient doing CAD during those 6 weeks because you're going through that learning.
Yeah, you're kind of a little bit of a fish out of water when you first start using Onshape, because there's a couple of different paradigms. You know, you're not using Windows Explorer anymore, right? You're not using your file system. You're using a database-driven CAD system, which is running in your browser, which is structured differently. So it does take a little adjustment period.
And then there's like some CAD stuff too, right? Like our assembly mates, we believe, are far superior than other systems, but they're definitely very different and they take some getting used to. And then lastly, so this is percent of CAD time. This one's a very generous one, but it's saying 20% of all engineering time during those 6 weeks are going to be spent doing setup stuff. So bringing in some old files, translating them, setting up drawing templates. Again, I think this is typically much lower for most of our customers, but we're trying to be a little over conservative here. And you can see you could override these for competitors too, but everything's the same between these two except for the training. As Mike was mentioning, most time that you're going to like a SolidWorks bar training, you're sending your engineer there for the full week. So that's a full week of lost productivity. But if that's not your case, go ahead and change that. What we end up finding, and I think this is the biggest misconception about switching CAD systems, most people think about switching a CAD system and believe it's like some insurmountable task. Like it's going to take us forever to switch, it's going to take us forever to move some of our data over, the learning curve is just not worth it. But at the end of the day, this is how much it's costing to switch, and this is how much it would cost to stay and to train that one additional engineer, for example. And this ends up being only a tiny, tiny fraction of the total cost of ownership. So that is one thing. If there's one thing you leave today with, it should be the notion that most people think about switching CAD systems as some impossible task. It's not. We deal with thousands of customers that have done it, and the saving or the cost, the actual business cost of performing that switch is far less than the overall savings. Lastly, we bake in that, I mean, we wouldn't have built Onshape if we didn't believe it was overall a better CAD system and that it could save you time in your day. So going back to the whole freeing you to do your work, this I think is way overly conservative, but we're essentially claiming that when you're working on CAD, which we assumed was 30% of your day, you'll be 5% faster just in general.
And it's going to be way faster than that. Yes. I mean, you think about the collaboration, being able to work simultaneously, no check-in or check-out process to wait for one, passing the baton to one engineer to another. You know, there's multi-body part modeling, the way we're doing it, the way the mating works. All these things are going to be way more than 5%, but we did just want to be a little bit hard on ourselves a little bit and make that a conservative number. So totally. Yeah.
So I'm hoping this gives some insight about how this, what assumptions we're making and how they're being computed. And at the very least, so I have a question here. How do we get access to the spreadsheet? I'll send an email, or you'll get an email after this webinar, either today or tomorrow, with a link to a view-only version of this Google Doc, at which point you can make a copy and do all your own things. But the main thing you need to know is that you go from top to bottom, inputting the variables that are relevant to you here. If there are any buckets that you don't believe pertains to you, just switch this yellow to no. I mean, obviously, we think that they're all relevant, but for example, like if you don't have PDM and you can't imagine ever buying PDM, feel free to switch that to no. And then if there are any assumptions that we made that you don't quite believe, or that you have a scenario that's special to you, just input the values here. And I want to pause for just a second to hit some of these other questions. Somebody asked, why is your computer cheaper than competitors? And we covered that a little bit earlier, but it essentially comes down to the fact that when you're working with Onshape, we have the secure cloud workspace that's doing all the heavy lifting, and we actually use AWS, or Amazon Web Services, to be our cloud supplier. And all that heavy-duty computation is being done up on the cloud. So you can get away with using much cheaper computers to run the same level of powerful CAD.
Yeah, you can use a card for graphics that's designed more for gaming than the CAD workstation graphics cards. Yeah, just think about it. All the workstation development and graphics development are going into mobile devices, like the graphics that are happening on your iPad, or graphics for gaming and VR and those kind of things, and not to the CAD workstation market, which is actually a pretty small market for, like a company like NVIDIA, for example. So, you're going to get the benefit of using the more modern kind of graphics technology, which in fact is lesser cost, like on a MacBook Pro or a GeForce graphics card versus a Quadro graphics card, if you pay attention to those kind of things. So, we run MacBook Pros, which are about $2,200 in the current configuration that we have. So that's where that number comes from.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
So that should give an idea of how we're computing these values and what assumptions we're making. So going back to the savings slide, let me just make sure I didn't override anything I wasn't supposed to. All looks good. So again, the scenario is you have SOLIDWORKS Professional, you have 3 seats, you're looking to add 1 more, and you're considering adding PDM. So if you factor in both the tangible and indirect costs, you're looking at a cost of about $50K up front, large amounts over time, and Onshape obviously is drastically less. Let's take out
let's take out one of these things like
let's take a look at only the tangible costs.
Yeah.
So if we look at just hard cash, you can see even just hard cash wise, Onshape is cheaper across the board, and your total savings over those 5 years is going to be $23,000. So $23,000 cash. I'll let you guys think about what you can do with that cash, and then of course adding in the indirect costs. That's time saved that can be spent towards productive engineering activity. Cool.
Less membership to the hair club for men too.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move to the second scenario. So we're going to do 3 scenarios. The second one is going to be startups and a company that is maybe smaller and looking to purchase their very first CAD system as opposed to switching. And then our third scenario is going to be a much larger company with an enterprise with PDM already implemented.
Yeah. Let's think of an example here. I'm thinking of a company also down the street in Cambridge. I love thinking of my local, CAD friends. But company, startup, no CAD today. They're considering SOLIDWORKS because, of course, you learn SOLIDWORKS in school, right? So they're obviously thinking about, the next CAD system. They need to go buy a suite of SOLIDWORKS, and then they read something on the web saying, oh, well, what about Onshape? And they're going to consider us now. So they have 3 engineers, mechanical engineers anyway. They need CAD. They also do a lot of stuff with bolts, nuts, and screws, so they need to buy the toolbox, hardware libraries. That's part of SOLIDWORKS Professional. They're not going to use PDM, or they don't think they need PDM. That's where everybody starts, by the way. They don't need PDM, and then they're up to 10, 15, 20 engineers, and they're all stepping on each other's toes, and then they need to buy a PDM. At that point, the horse is out of the barn, and all the files are a mess, and then they need to migrate their data into a PDM, which is obviously why we built Onshape. So you would never have to make that decision. You get data management with Onshape. So anyway, I guess in this scenario, Noah, we would probably say they're looking for SOLIDWORKS Professional.
Yep.
They need 3 seats new.
Yep.
For each
SOLIDWORKS. CAD seats needed 3.
Yeah, exactly.
No CAD currently. Looking at Onshape Professional, and because they're not looking at PDM yet, we've made that no. So if you include both tangible and indirect, again, very large spike up front for SOLIDWORKS Professional. Onshape Professional, much lower, and of course, much lower annual as well. And just because I know people are probably wondering in their heads, what does this look like if you take out the indirect costs?
So yeah, you're buying the seats of SOLIDWORKS, the initial seats and the subscription, and of course with Onshape, it's just the subscription.
That's right.
There's no, seat to buy.
I mean, this is interesting, right? Onshape might cost marginally more the next couple years, but for startups, it's usually the upfront capital costs that's the barrier to entry, right? So when you're looking at old CAD systems, you're looking at this massive check right at the beginning. Onshape, very small check comparatively upfront, even if it's marginally more year over year. And if you factor in the efficiency that you're likely to experience and factor in the design gridlock and even include the ramp up time, those savings are far more dramatic. So this is something, again, startups and other companies in general often only look at that hard cash, but the majority of the cost is going to come from design gridlock and these indirect costs.
Yeah, even if you get the CAD system for free, to start up,
Yeah, and we could plug that in too. Let's see, we can plug in an override saying SOLIDWORKS Professional is $0. and the yearly cost is $0. So even if you get the CAD system for free, you're spending a lot of money.
There are people that get that, you know, they're still using their university license, or, you know, they might get a special deal for an entrepreneur seat for a year. They're working in a maker space where they have, you know, access to it. Even at that, you know, you're still going to be ahead with Onshape.
Totally. So let me just reset these overrides, and then we'll do our final scenario. And at that point, we'll open it up to questions and ask for some feedback. So
yeah, what's the third? The third one actually is a maybe a large or medium to large size organization, you know, that has a CAD system. You know, I mean, we keep picking on SolidWorks, but it could be any CAD system. You know, we've actually designed this calculator for Inventor and SolidWorks right now, and we'll probably add more over time, and you can add a custom one, of course, and put in your own number if you're using CATIA, NX, Pro Engineer, or whatever. But let's say they're using SolidWorks and SolidWorks PDM Professional, EPDM, also known as that, right? So they have 50 seats of SolidWorks now. They need 5 more right away. So this is why the question came up. And these are all just kind of being pulled from questions that we get all the time on the floor here by people calling in. They have a quote on their desk for 5 more seats of SolidWorks, and you know, it's like enough is enough, and they're not going to take it anymore kind of call. And so they have 50 seats now. They're up for subscription. They need to buy 5 more. They also have 25 viewer seats of the PDM software that allows them to, you know, view inside of the e-drawings the PDM data, you know, because you can't view it without a PDM license for viewing. They really want to start expanding the use of view-only seats to everybody on the shop floor and in sales and procurement so that they can take advantage of all the information. But 25 just isn't enough to cut it, so they want to add 75 more to round that out at 100 users total. And just a couple of other anecdotes, you know, they have 5 CAD administrators that work part-time at each site. They just bought another company that they need to merge data in. Of course, those kinds of pieces of information aren't part of this calculator, but all those things are obviously easier when you implement something like Onshape, merging companies together, you know, the lack of the need for CAD administration. So let's look at the numbers there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And in fact, the last thing I'm going to input here is Onshape Enterprise as the thing that they're comparing against. Companies from a variety of sizes, I mean, in this case, very large, but also just small kind of dispersed teams that are located in different areas, likely would want to choose Onshape or Onshape Enterprise. This is a product that we released just a couple of weeks ago, actually. We have a few customers that have been using it for months, and they've put hundreds of hours into it, but it's really well suited to those larger or distributed teams, especially because it has this concept of full and light view users. So we're going to compare to Onshape Enterprise, and I mean, the savings are pretty staggering. But let's see what this looks like if I take out some of the indirect costs. So here you can see, I mean, indirect costs, that is the big thing. And it's really important to consider that is what your engineers are doing on a day-to-day basis, right? Every hour that they're putting into the system, if they're running into this design gridlock and running into these problems that I think we all fairly know and understand are part of the everyday, that is so much of the value that can be saved in using something like a modern CAD system.
Exactly.
So at this point, we've run through a couple of scenarios. And what I'd like to do is open this up to feedback and questions. Hopefully we've proven that oh, you know what? I didn't include PDM there. That was
oh, that's why the numbers
yeah,
are a little crazy. Okay.
Exactly. Okay, no wonder why. So yeah, thanks for catching that there. Obviously, when you're paying for PDM across that many people, those costs are a lot.
Yeah.
So at this point, please, if you have a scenario of your own that you'd like to run through, feel free to share us some of these variables, and we can spend a couple of minutes on that. If you don't believe us, that's interesting to know. But we'd like to hear your guys' take on and what your thoughts are on the return on investment on a CAD system. Are you facing these issues that we see every day?
Yeah, use the questions panel. That's the best way to, you know, so we can reply and see them all here.
We did have one question come in. Do you offer built-in photorealistic rendering, such as you might purchase from a vendor like Keyshot?
Great question. Yeah.
Great question. You know what? That's a whole additional category of kind of supplementary or supplemental engineering software. Whereas you might be locked down to buying one from your VAR, Onshape provides you a number of options. Those are all found through our app store. If you're interested in rendering, I'd encourage you to check it out. There's a number of options that are completely free and then some that you can pay for.
Yeah, Keyshot's obviously on that list. That was one of the questions there. Yeah.
You know what? Great point. I will share I will add a link to the, I'll get you all a view-only link.
Oh, yeah, people can use it right now. Yeah.
And I will put this in the chat.
The cloud. SaaS.
Not going to email you this file. Thank you. Okay, so you all have access to a view-only version of this document. To make your own copy, go up to the top right or top left corner, go File, Make a Copy. I would switch out the word webinar with like your name or something, and you feel free to play with it yourself here. So at this point, I'm going to end the recording of the webinar, but I am going to, Mike and I will stay on the line and we can just talk story or answer any questions or go through any scenarios that you might have. So thank you everyone very much, and we'll stay on